Okay, so it looks like we've got several ready to go with us and nobody else in the waiting room, so I think we'll go ahead and get started this morning. I will be monitoring that waiting room, so if you see me looking away or kind of trailing off in thought, give me just a moment to get them in and get refocused. So this morning's agenda, we'll do our normal welcome and mindfulness, and then we will hear from Tanya Albano on a review of the trauma-informed tools, and she's going to give us some time for Q&A. After Tanya, we will hear from Darci Peterson, who is with Dcfs. And then we'll just take a quick 10-minute break for comfort and a brain break before we hear from Amanda Darrow from the Utah Pride Center. Let's get going here. So today's mindfulness, I just picked some quick activities that I thought could actually be taught to the students as well as work for you guys. So the first one is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I like this activity because I feel like I can do it in any setting. Even if I need to take a few minutes in a meeting to refocus myself, I feel like this is a good kind of covert mindfulness that you can accomplish without most people noticing. So the first step is to look for 5 things around you. So this morning I have computer monitors and my pens and pencils and tissues, and if I look over here, there's my furry coworkers, and then of course I can see my reflection here in the recording with my office behind me. So the next part of the activity is 4 things you can touch. And I think it's important that you actually demonstrate the touching. So like touching a tissue and feeling the paperiness to it, touching your mouse, touching your keyboard. If you're like me and you're cheating wearing flip-flops, you can slip off your shoes and feel the floor beneath you, but you just want to find 4 things you can touch. After the 4 things you can touch, you look for listen for 3 things you can hear. So this morning I can hear birds out my window and my son down the hall playing video games and the little chimes as people are coming into the waiting room. The next is 2 things you can smell. In a classroom, this may not be the easiest option, but I still think there's an opportunity to smell. So like this morning I was thinking ahead, so I've got my highlighter. I can smell that highlighter, and then I can smell that coffee of mine still brewing. And then one thing you could taste. So maybe this is a good option to have like some mints or something with you in case you want to give the kiddo a mint before you start this activity. Otherwise, like myself this morning, I know I can taste my coffee. So again, this is a quick one, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Typically I can do this in about 30 seconds or less and feel more focused. It does tend to help with anxiety and anger. So if you've got an anxious or angry kiddo, this might be a great activity to teach them. The next mindfulness piece I have are some free downloadable resources. This first one on the left, the I Am Grateful For worksheet, encourages the student to list positive things about themselves, their strengths and qualities, things they're good at doing, positive things about their health and body, reasons they're grateful, activities they enjoy, people who teach and support them, and then the green arrow is for their goals and the dreams they have for the future. The one on the right is the mindfulness bingo. I tried to pick a bingo sheet that had applicable activities to all students regardless of their living situations, but I did notice a couple of them might be tricky, so this might be an opportunity for mentors to create their own and figure out what is more applicable, excuse me as I move the mouse and mess things up, what is more applicable to their students. And I was thinking perhaps you could challenge them to do one activity each week, and then they can go ahead and fill out their their sheet as they're meeting with you. The next is some more downloadable resources, and these are just color sheets, and I shouldn't say just because they definitely work. I like the quiet seclusion of kind of going inward and coloring. I also found out there are apps out there that will let you use your phone or your tablet to do the coloring. So even if you don't have an option for a printer, there's a way to get the coloring done that will help your students calm and refocus, or yourself calm and refocus. So with that, I've gone a little quicker than expected, but I think we're ready to keep going. So I will introduce Tanya Albano. She recently joined the Utah State Board of Education as a prevention specialist for at-risk students after working for 20 years in child welfare. Early in her career, she worked as both a caseworker and a child welfare ombudsman. For the last 11 years, she held a position as the Foster Care Program Administrator for the Division of Child and Family Services, which included responsibilities such as training caseworkers and stakeholders, writing law and policy, overseeing contracts and partners, and researching and implementing best practices to improve Utah's child welfare system. During her time as a foster care program administrator, Ms. Albano passionately worked to improve education outcomes for children in foster care and dedicated much of her energy to educating the foster care community and partners about effects of trauma and how to counteract trauma by increasing positive factors. Tanya also recently finished her master's degree in social work at the University of Utah and is a mother of 3 beautiful daughters. So with that, I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen and pass the torch to Tanya. And I will turn off my camera, Tanya, but I'm here if you need me.
Sorry, I accidentally muted myself. Good morning, everyone. Can someone let me know if they can hear me? Maybe put something in the chat box. Okay. I realize that asking you to go back a couple of weeks and ask me questions about the presentation that we did is probably not going to be very realistic. So I wanted to go back to some of the things that we talked about and that maybe I rushed through a little bit because of time constraints that day that I was presenting. I feel like this section of what we talked about that day was one of the most important sections, and so I wanted to review it with you and maybe give you a few more thoughts and tools about how to use this when working with students. If you remember, we talked about how these kids who come from trauma have not had the opportunity or the chance to have their brains develop the way that others who might not be from trauma had the opportunity to have their brains develop. That means they haven't had the ability to practice calming and coping skills and be able to have those synapses between the neurons in their brains develop so that they can calm themselves when they go through hard and difficult situations. So one of the key things for you to understand is this connection between stress and learning. And we know that kids that come from trauma live in their survival and emotional states. The more stress they feel, the faster that they'll go back into that survival part of the brain. And so one of the things that's really important is that we are able to explain to them and have them understand when they're calm in a state where they're not dysregulated, the connection between their emotions and their brain functioning. And a lot of people are a little bit skeptical, or they think, well, that's not going to help them. But I've had, in the experiences that I've had, it really helps for a child to be able to understand their brain and their brain development. And then it gives them the language to be able to talk about their anger and their emotions when they're in that state of, when they're escalating or when they're in that state of dysregulation. One of the things that I wanted to also reiterate to you today is that this Maslow's hierarchy of needs concept that you learned in the Check and Connect training, and also that I went over with you a few weeks ago, is also really important because kids can't learn and they can't go into their higher functioning part of their brains if they don't feel safe and if they don't have their needs taken care of. So when I was the foster care program administrator at the state office for Dcfs, I had access to all the healthcare data for all of the children in foster care. And what would you guys say? Go ahead and unmute yourself and answer this if you know the answer to this question. What would you guys say was the #1 healthcare need for children in foster care? Or you can throw it in the chat. Anyone? Okay, mental health. You would think that that's a very common healthcare need, and it was, but that was not the #1 need. What else do you think it might be? Meals. Okay, meals was definitely, they needed to make sure that they were eating well, and that is essential for functioning, but it's along those lines, but it's not meals. Any other guesses? Stability is also definitely, that goes with that safety need, but the #1 need that the #1 healthcare need that children in foster care had was they all had sleep issues across the board, which fits with this physiological part of the Maslow's hierarchy of need pyramid. So what I would say to you is that if you have a kiddo that you're working with that's constantly becoming dysregulated, that's having a really hard time, one of the things that needs to be discussed about that kid is how is that student sleeping? How are they doing at night? I also guarantee you that if they're not sleeping in their foster home, then nobody else in the foster home is sleeping well either, which will go towards the functioning of everyone in that home. So a recommendation would be to explore with the foster parent and the caseworker how that child is sleeping. Oftentimes when they were in their home before they were removed, the situation is such where they're not sleeping at night because they have people coming in and out, or they've got things happening around them that where they just didn't feel safe or able to sleep. The other thing is that sometimes parents just didn't care and kids would stay up all night long, and then they become accustomed to that, right? Sort of like my kids are right now because they're on summer vacation. Or they would stay up playing video games all night, or for our older teens that they'd be up on their phones all night. So if they haven't been getting the sleep that they need, it's almost impossible for them to be able to move up this pyramid to the point where they're able to learn. So I really wanted to make sure that that's being discussed and addressed. Sometimes that gets overlooked. That question doesn't get asked very much among the team members about how is that child sleeping. And so it's just really important that someone try to remember to bring that up so that we can explore those issues. Somebody mentioned safety and stability. Yes, they definitely need to also feel safe and stable in order to be able to move up into the higher functioning parts of their brain. And if a child is always thinking about, I might be moved tomorrow, or this foster family is not going to want me either, so I'm going to have to move to another home, they're not going to feel that feeling of safety and stability. And so they'll always be functioning in that lower part of their brain, in this survival and emotional part of their brain. Okay, so how do we teach this to the kids that we're working with? I quickly mentioned this in our last time together. We talked about this hand model of the brain. And I just think this is a really effective way to teach all ages of kids. You can modify it for a younger kid. You can talk about it a little bit more in detail with your older kiddos that you're working with. There's a video online of Dr. Dan Siegel explaining this model that can probably do it way more justice than I can. But this is just a really simple, easy way to explain. And what you do is you just take your hand and you say to them, like, imagine that this hand is like your brain. And it really is, because when you close up in a fist, that's about the size of your brain inside of your skull. And they think that's really cool, right? So this part of your brain right here is the first part of your brain that develops. And this is the oldest part of our brain. It's called the reptilian brain. So if you think about kind of a lizard, what are some of those basic functioning things that lizards have? And it would be like breathing, your heart. They're really Lizards are really skittish, so anything that kind of comes their way danger-wise, they'll kind of run away. So this area of your brain is like that lizard part of your brain, where it will always be telling yourself to protect yourself. It's that survival, and it's the part that reacts to threats. And then you have the limbic area, or our emotional part of our brain. This is like where our big emotions live. And then ask them to name some of those big emotions that they feel. Like anger, sadness, happiness lives here. Some people call this the puppy dog brain, because how does a puppy dog act? You know, they're either when they're scared, they'll growl at you, they'll be really protective of themselves, or they're always really happy. So this is where our big emotions live, and it's also where our safety radar lives. So this is the area of our brain that always is scanning, saying, are there any threats, right? So the brainstem and the limbic area are those areas that kids in trauma mostly live in. When a child feels safe and secure and they have the things that they need to, safety, meals, sleep, those types of things, then they can live in what we call the prefrontal cortex. And this is the higher functioning part of our brain, the thinking part of our brain. This is the part of our brain that helps us to calm down, helps us make good choices, helps us to be empathetic towards others and to understand others' feelings. And this is the part of the brain that we need in order to be able to learn in school. And when our brain is functioning and when we're calm, our brain kind of functions like this. It's all together as one. But when we get dysregulated, angry, upset, tired, hungry, we have a tendency to do what we call is flip our lid, right? And that's where our higher functioning part of our brain becomes disconnected from the lower portions of our brain. And then it becomes really difficult for us to function because we're just functioning in the emotional and in the survival parts of our brain. So what we have to do is figure out coping skills and ways that we can calm ourselves down so that we can become one whole brain again and function together as one, right? So that we can get back into our thinking brain. So once you teach this concept to kids in a way that they understand it, if there's a situation where they become dysregulated in the classroom or when they become dysregulated in the foster home, the first thing you have to do is help them calm down and get back into their thinking brain. So you can talk to them like this. I see that you've flipped your lid right now, or I see that you might be a little bit in your lower part of your brain right now. I see that your downstairs brain might be working with you right now and not so much your upstairs brain. What can we do to help you calm down so that we can get you back into that upstairs brain? And this is where mindfulness comes in. And so I'm really glad that Amanda is teaching you guys some mindfulness skills. One of the number one most important things that we teach them to do is breathing techniques. Because one of the things that we do when we become angry, if you think about it, is we stop breathing. We start getting really shallow breaths, right? And we don't get the oxygen to our brain that we need in order to be able to think and function clearly. So one of the most important things you can do is to help them calm down and take deep breaths. Now, I've tried this with kids at times when they're dysregulated, and I'll say, you need to stop and you need to breathe. And they'll get upset with me and they'll be like, no, I don't. Leave me alone. I hate that stupid exercise, right? So sometimes they just won't be responsive to those deep breathing exercises, which is where 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 comes in, which I'm really glad I mentioned this morning because it fits right in with what I was going to talk about. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is an exercise to get them to slow down and bring themselves back to the present moment. And that's why it works. So if they're paying attention to what's around them, 5 things that they see, 4 things that they hear, 3 things that they, whatever the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 was that Amanda taught you, if they're paying attention to the present moment, then it slows them down, it slows down their breathing, and it helps them become back regulated again so that they can talk about what's happening around them. So if the breathing technique isn't helping for them, like it doesn't with some kids, then my suggestion is that you try the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 or other mindfulness exercises that will bring them back to the present moment. So I want to stop there and ask if you have any questions about this hand model of the brain and how you can use it with kids. And go ahead and unmute. You can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask me, or you can throw the questions into the chat. Do you find this helpful? Is there anyone out there? This is the participation part. Anyone had experience with doing that? Go ahead. Go ahead, whoever's unmuted themselves.
I think I had unmuted myself, Tanya, but that was just to invite everybody again to ask you questions here.
Okay.
And I know we have some participants on their phone and iPad, so that might be part of why we're having a hard time here. But like you said, if you want to throw it in the chat, that definitely works too.
And this is the part where you can unmute yourself and talk. I know everyone's kind of like, I don't want to talk live on a webinar, but has anyone really had experience with teaching mindfulness or using a moment when they might be dysregulated to help them calm down and bring them back to a point where they're calm and able to talk about what happened?
Well, while everybody's being shy, I'll go ahead and share for you, Tanya. My oldest has a severe anxiety when it comes to going into the school auditorium. And it doesn't matter if it's all of Highland or just half of the kids or whatever it is, it's just too much for him. So he has come up with the idea, he calls me and we do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 together. And then I try to get him to do a bit of a guided mindfulness moment for himself to calm down and regulate his breathing before he goes in. And I would say 4 out of 5 times we've been very successful and he's been able to go into the auditorium and listen to the presentations and actually engage with the program.
Awesome, thank you. That's a great example of being able to use this. Not only with someone who might be upset or getting angry, but also, yes, to help and calm down their anxiety. That's another thing I wanted to mention, that fight, flight, or freeze doesn't always look like anger, and it always doesn't look like anxiety. It also looks like they want to run away, right? So they're saying, I just want to get out of here. I just want to leave the classroom. Freeze looks like they just, like a deer in headlights, right? So they're not going to talk to you. They're not going to say anything. They're just kind of staring at you. That's what freeze is. That's also them working from these lower areas of their brain. And they're in fight, flight, or freeze. If you know that they're in fight, flight, or freeze, then you need to also help them work to get back towards the higher functioning part of their brain. So you need to be able to develop a relationship with them so that you can distinguish between they're just being shy versus they might be in fight, flight, or freeze. Go ahead. Was there someone that was going to make a comment?
Hi, Tanya, it's Julia. I was just going to make a comment too, that I have seen parents that are working to reunite with their children learning these skills in their treatment, and then watching them actually perform these kinds of mindfulness activities. I've even seen someone use the brain, the hand with the brain, in supervised visits to help calm their children down. And so I think maybe just suggesting too that we work on this with kids, but also if you have, the ear of the parent, or you can help them learn those same skills so they're getting it both at home and at school.
Right. That's perfect. Thank you. And I also want to bring up, since you brought up the parents, that it is important that the parents learn this as well, learn this kind of language and skills, because they themselves, what we've seen is that these parents themselves come from families and backgrounds of trauma. And so they themselves also get into their downstairs part of their brain very frequently. And if they can learn it for themselves and start practicing it for themselves, then they can help their children practice it as well. So I've also seen and recognized that there is a need for some foster parents to learn this as well. They do, as I mentioned a couple weeks ago when I presented on this, go through a comprehensive trauma training when they become foster parents. But you have to understand that the point foster parents are in training, that's before any children are placed in their home, and they don't really have experience with kids in trauma. So this really becomes important to help remind them of these things after the child is placed in their home and after they're having these situations come up, because they can also get into their downstairs brain. So if you just have opportunity, I'm not saying that you should be the one, but if you have opportunity to talk to a foster parent and they're saying that they're frustrated with this kid and that this kid is always acting out, remind them it's not about their behaviors, or it's not about what they're doing. This is about a trauma reaction, and this is about what happened to them. And then, have this conversation of, remember, in your training, I know that you learned that you need to help the child regulate themselves, calm down, in order to be able to function in that higher part of their brain. And it takes practice. It takes role playing with them. It takes using this language with them in those moments so that they can make sure to develop these skills and develop those connections in their brain, so that they can go to this when they are starting to feel upset. If we're trying to do this after they're already upset, it's effective using the mindfulness, but it's not as effective as if when they're on the upward swing, right? So if we can get to know the child well enough where we can see that they're starting to get dysregulated and start using some of these skills on the upward swing, then we can be much more effective with them. Okay. I also gave you this handout, which is another way that you can explain it to the kids themselves. If the hand model isn't making sense to them, or if they're a little bit maybe more higher functioning and they need to understand it a little bit better, or even to review with them. You can use this as a handout to go over with them and say, remember we talked about these parts of the brain. So this is why I gave you another option to help explain it to them. Another thing I wanted to also review with you today is this idea of the window of tolerance. This is kind of the same idea of what we've been talking about, but maybe a more simplified or a different perspective that can help them understand why sometimes they can't calm down. And it's this concept that everyone has a window of tolerance. That's when we're in that upstairs brain, that functioning part of our brain, and we can access reason, and we can access healthy emotion. Sorry, got distracted by my children there. When we can be mentally engaged in a learning activity, those types of things. In kids that come from trauma, this window of tolerance is generally much smaller than a child who hasn't been in situations of trauma and that hasn't had trauma affect them. So they get into this hyperarousal or hypoarousal state much easier than others. So it's really important, again, that we can recognize that when they're on the upswing and they're getting into the hyperarousal or hypoarousal, and again, hypoarousal looks like that, looks depressed, lethargic, numb, unmotivated. That's when we need to use mindfulness, breath work, physical activity. Maybe sometimes you can take them out for a walk and that will help them. Hyperarousal is that emotionally distressed, angry, overreactive state where they're just constantly in this kind of state where people are like, they just overreact to everything. They're just always angry. That's hyperarousal. So maybe talking about it in this, from this perspective might resonate more with foster parents or with teachers, or even with the child themselves, to say, your window of tolerance, we might need to work on that a little bit. We might need to increase your coping skills so that we can increase your window of tolerance, so we can get you back into a state of the higher, your higher learning brain easier, or your upstairs brain easier. So I think that these types of things, helping talk about brain functioning to kids in this way, takes the it takes the guilt off of them, and it also helps them to understand that everybody has these types of issues, not just they're not alone in this. And maybe we just need to help them develop skills, and it helps them to understand that I'm not alone in this, and it kind of takes that blame away from them. It makes them think like there's not something wrong with me. It's just that I maybe need to develop some more skills. So, any questions or comments about this? Please feel free. Okay, what situations have come up with kids that you're working with that you might have questions about? We can talk about that too, as far as trauma, that kind of thing.
Tanya, this is
Yes.
Anne.
Hi.
One thing that I think is quite a challenge is when we understand these things and we see a child in a classroom situation where the teacher is struggling with understanding these concepts. What are some appropriate ways that we can share this information with teachers that are going to be interacting with these kids daily to help them have a better experience and the child to have a better experience?
Okay, so I think that this is a great question. I love this question. And I know that it might be different across the state as far as what your interactions are with teachers in the classroom. But if you have chance to work with teachers and teach them these concepts, or just even not teach them, but just communicate with them about these types of concepts and help them understand it's not about what this child is doing, but about what happened to them, then I think that's some of the most effective ways that you can work with teachers. I'm glad that you brought that up, Anne, because the last slide, if this will let me advance it, in this presentation, talks about some strategies that you can use with the youth, and you can make this into a handout and provide it to them as well. But I do want to mention that the most important thing that you can help teachers understand is that trauma will always be trauma, but the only way to heal trauma is in the context of healthy relationships. So if they don't feel connected to you, if they don't feel like you care about them, then they're not going to be able to function and regulate themselves in your classroom. So teachers have to find ways, concerted ways to make an effort to build that relationship with these children, even if they're only there for a short time. So if you as a mentor know the types of things that this child likes, maybe you can help the teacher to understand, like, this is the kinds of things that I do with them, that I've been able to build a relationship with them over. Also, maybe if there's ways that you can help the teacher see the child in a new light, and I'm not talking about like maybe talking about their trauma or going into depth, but just reminding them, like, this child has come from a really difficult background, and there's been some things happen to this child that makes the child function the way that they do, that makes them go into these fight, flight, or freeze modes very easily. And so we need to help regulate them. We need to give them some mindfulness activities that they can do in the classroom. And it also occurred to me just now that I have a list of like over 100 and something coping skills that we can help kids develop, that I can send to Amanda, and maybe we can work together to whittle those down to classroom appropriate type behaviors that you can also provide to the teachers. So you can say, here's some ways that the child can cope, and it's especially effective if you know that that a child responds to a certain coping mechanism. Like, do they respond well to being able to color for 5 minutes? Do they respond well to tactile type interventions? Like, if they're able to play with, you know, Play-Doh or something in their hands for a minute. It's especially helpful if you can help the teachers understand that these are ways that the kids are using to cope, so that they don't become dysregulated. Does that help, Anne?
Sorry, it always takes me a minute to figure out how to unmute again. Yes, that's very helpful. I appreciate that. It's hard to see a kid struggling with a teacher and know how to make these suggestions sometimes without sounding like we're trying to tell the teacher how to do her job. So to be able to just share resources is very helpful.
Yeah, and you can talk about it in a way that's like, I've worked with a lot of students who come from these trauma backgrounds, and these are ways that I've found work for me when I'm working with these kids. So talk about it in a non-accusatory fashion, and talk about it in a general way. Like, these are things that I know work with these types of students. And also you can say, well, I know this student well, and I know that this works with this student, and maybe the foster parents use this in the home, so maybe it could help you in the classroom type thing. Another thing is, if you have any of you watched the short film called Removed? Does anyone use that in training or anything with the mentors? Or is anyone familiar with that?
Sorry, I'll shut up after this, but yes, we have used that, and it is so powerful.
Right. So I would say one of the things that might be powerful, if you have the ability and you've had occasion to, maybe direct a teacher that's having a hard time with working with one of these kids to that short film. I found that it really helps solidify in the minds of some people that might be a little bit resistant to some of these ideas, that these kids really have been through a lot, and we need to take that into account. So maybe watch it with them, or suggest that they watch it in a staff meeting, because I think all education personnel could benefit from that kind of a perspective. It's not just kids in foster care that have trauma. It's also other kids in their classroom, right, that go through these trauma experiences that maybe not rise to the level that they need to be removed from the home, or trauma that has happened to them not in their home, trauma experiences that they've had. And still some other kids in their classroom have these types of behaviors as well. So I think everyone could benefit from watching that short film and getting that perspective. So I will send you the link to Removed. I will send it to Amanda and she can send it out to the group. I'm making a note of that right now. And I will also make a note to send the list of coping mechanisms or coping skills. Okay, that is a lot of information that we went through. Does anyone have any questions? Any specific questions maybe about students that you've worked with? Here's a list that I went through with you that's in that PowerPoint. And remember, Amanda did send this PowerPoint out to you as well, so you all have access to it. This is the list that I would also provide to educators. Have them inform themselves on trauma, have them understand ways in the classrooms that they may be depleting the youth self-regulation skills. And what I mean by that is that maybe they're doing something in the classroom that is triggering the youth, or that's reminding them of something that they went through or that their parents at home did. If there's a lot of yelling or shouting in the classroom, I haven't, you know, teachers will say, I don't yell at my kids, but the kids' perceptions are always like, my teacher yells all the time. So if you hear a child that's saying that, you probably know that that's triggering them in some way. And I mean, if you feel comfortable enough to approach the teacher about that just in a general way and say, you know, this child came from a background of trauma and there was a lot of yelling and shouting in the home and that triggers the child. And you know, if there might be times where you raise your voice a little bit in the classroom, that might be setting off the child or getting them into that fight, flight, or freeze mode where they're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. And so talking about it like that with the teacher, addressing it and saying, you know, if you feel comfortable enough, you could even say, you know, the child has mentioned several times that they feel like you might yell a lot in the classroom, and whether or not, you know, you're yelling because you're upset with the kids, or you might be yelling even, you know, to start a fun activity and you're trying to do it in a fun way. That is scaring them a little bit. It's putting them back into that mode. So reminding them that some of the things they do in their classroom might be triggering to the youth. I also want to mention while we're talking about this, many kids are triggered by senses of smell, and sometimes they're able to articulate this and sometimes they aren't. But if they come across a certain smell that reminds them of a situation that they were in, things like that, then that can throw them into that state of dysregulation. So one experience that I had when I was working with a kid in foster care is that they were continuously becoming dysregulated, and a problem in the classroom when a certain person would come into the classroom. And they only noticed it because they were documenting and recording these experiences and what was happening with him. And what ended up coming out was he said that the cologne that this person was wearing reminded him of the cologne that his abuser used. And so it would throw him back into that environment where he was going to be abused, and he just felt unsafe. And so what they just had the person not wear cologne or change their cologne, and funny enough, they didn't have any more behavioral issues with that child for the rest of the year. So that was a powerful lesson to me about how important it is to not just talk about the way we interact, but also other environmental things. So, and another really important thing is to have make sure that the youth has ways to build healthy supportive connections. So mentioning this to the teacher if there's other kids in the classroom that might be a little bit more empathetic or might be open to really building friendships with that child, maybe having that opportunities for that child to be surrounded by those kids. And to find ways to build those friendships. Because like I said, trauma is healed in the context of relationships. And again, making sure the teachers build healthy relationships with them, that our interactions are to build them up, not to break them down, and to make sure their basic needs are taken care of first. So again, I mentioned making sure they're sleeping well at night, making sure that they've eaten. One of the most effective questions you can ask to a child who might be having issues in a classroom is, did you eat breakfast before you came to school today? Or are you hungry when you're at school? And again, how did you sleep last night? So making sure to explore those things. And then we already talked about the identifying patterns of behavior that are possible triggers. So that again is a lot of information, and I think we're coming about down to the time that I need to stop here. So I just want to again leave it open to you if you have any questions. Sounds like somebody might have a question, so go ahead.
Well, I'm not having a question. I have an experience that now that
okay, great.
Now that you're talking about when the kids they feel that the teacher is yelling, I have a special ed student. I had been with him like for 4 years already. And he started telling me he was taking a theater class, you know, and he told me the teacher is always yelling, and it made me scared and sometimes mad because I'm thinking that she's mad at us and things like that, right? So I talked to him and I told him, okay, let me go to the classroom, you know, and because I'm used to go to the classroom with my teachers and everything, I went there and I saw that the teacher was sitting very behind on the classroom on the theater, right? So I talked to her and I said, you know what? That's how my student is feeling, and I can understand. I completely understand. I told the teacher, right now what he's talking about, you know, like probably you're too behind and you need to yell,
right.
you know. And so she said, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. And I say, okay, but you know what, I told her my idea, it was more like she could talk to him and explain to her why she was not yelling, that she was giving instruction, because my student didn't have this comprehension of about what theater was, right? That was his first or second class. So the teacher told me, no, you know what, I'm going to make sure that I talk to him, and we went and talked to him, and she's very friendly, you know, one of the best teachers there at the school. So
Good.
I knew that it was kind of like a miscommunication because they didn't know each other. So I was there. I told them, you know, we can talk and everything. So I got involved on the, you know, this relationship, and she even moved back, moved to the front, more closer to, she cannot yell anymore. Well, she still did that, but you know, that it was not bother him, and he understood why. She explained to him that it was more about instructions and getting the attention of the kid, but she was not mad at them. And yeah, all these, and right now they are the best friends. Well, before the pandemic, they were the best friends ever, you know, like it was very nice to see. But sometimes that's part of our job, right, to make this connection with the teachers and the and try to, because what I can see sometimes is some teachers, they don't take it well, you know, when you're talking to them. So we need to talk to them the best way that we can, and not trying to blame her for the reason that, you know. So that was my experience.
And saying it again, like you said, like maybe you're just yelling to give instructions to the kids to make sure that they hear you, but it's triggering for this child.
Yeah.
And I can see how it would be even more triggering if she's standing behind him and yelling, right? Because he doesn't know what's coming. All he hears is something loud behind him, which, you know, that would set off.
She changed a lot of things right now, just because of him, and that was very nice. But this is one kind of the teacher that love what she does, and it's kind of really make a difference, right? When teachers understand, because I talked to her about my student trauma and how to make her understand a little where he was coming from, right? So that he was not demanding, you know, you need to stop yelling, you know. So she understood completely, and right now they have a really good relationship. So I'm very
Perfect.
happy. Yeah.
That's a great example. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. That's exactly what I'm talking about. So making sure that you maybe if you get the chance, you can observe them in the classroom and maybe see something that the teacher doesn't see themselves, or perceive something that maybe nobody else has been able to understand, just coming from this framework of trauma. So if there's no other, go ahead.
No, thank you.
No, thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. So if there's no other comments or questions, I think I can turn the time back over to Amanda.
That sounds good. Yes. Thank you so much, Tanya, and those that were able to share with us today. We appreciate you guys. All right, now the trick is always to share the correct screen. So let's see if I got it right this time.
And thank you for letting me share, Amanda. And I guess in a couple weeks, we're going to talk about some ways that we can combat this trauma, and that we can build strengths in the child, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. We're going to get together again in July, and we're going to spend that whole time actually talking about protective factors, which I think will be an awesome presentation. I've had a sneak peek into Tanya's training, and I think it's exactly what a lot of the mentors have been asking for, so I hope it works right, or helps us. Anyway, sorry, the next presentation will be with Darci Peterson, who comes to us from Dcfs. She is the Salt Lake Valley Regional Child Welfare Administrator, Program Manager for Transition to Adult Living Services, and an Education Liaison. Whew, that's a big title, my friend. She grew up in Arizona and came to Utah to attend BYU, where she graduated with a BS in 1995. Darci loved Utah so much she stayed and started working for Dcfs in 1996. During her time with Dcfs, she has been a supervisor over permanency, adoption, and transition to adult living teams, and a liaison with the Division of Services for People with Disabilities. Darci has worked in the Okra neighborhood, Salt Lake Valley region, and Tooele County areas of Utah. She has specialized training and expertise with special education guidelines and has received numerous awards from Dcfs, including Caseworker of the Year in 2001 and 2004, Salt Lake Region Employee of the Year in 2006, and Supervisor of the Year in 2011. Darci loves to travel, true crime genre, animal rescue, and she's learning to play the guitar. Darci is a proud parent to a special needs dog and 3 hedgehogs. I love that, Darci. I am definitely a mother of all too. So with that, I will go ahead and stop sharing. And Darci should be able to take over. Just let me know if you're having any issues and I'll pop back in, Darci.
Great. Thank you, guys. That bio just made me feel old. I'm like 95. Some of you probably were not graduating college in 95. Anyway, I'm gonna, Dcfs uses Google Meet, I was telling Amanda, so I'm new to the Zoom, but let's see if I can do what I need to do.
And I'll give you a little tip. When you start sharing, your toolbar either floats to the bottom or the top of your screen. And I know that was a trick for me to figure out the first time.
Okay, so I'm sharing my screen. Is that visible?
Yes, so I can see your PowerPoint with the slides down the slide.
Yes, and I can't see anyone else at this point. So if there's questions, I guess I've left time at the end for questions. So.
Great, and I will be monitoring the chat. So if anything in that way, I'll just let you know.
Perfect. Please interrupt. So yes, Amanda wanted me to talk today a little bit about the relationship between youth and care mentors and Dcfs and schools in general. So it's valuable. It's an invaluable partnership. As she said, I'm the education administrator for Salt Lake Valley Dcfs, and I wanted to be the education liaison. I'm very passionate about our kids getting adequate education and being able to meet their needs in a school setting. I know these kids come with a lot of baggage, and it's difficult for schools at times to work with them, but I'm all about giving them that advantage, and I'm very passionate about Dcfs stepping up and being more engaged with schools on our end as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I just wanted to start with some statistics as to why this partnership is so important. Over 40% of children in foster care have educational difficulties, as you know. They're more than 2 times more likely to be in special ed. The percentage of foster youth who change schools when first entering foster care is 56 to 75%. That's just a mind-numbing statistic. Foster kids change schools on average 6 times. I mean, obviously that's probably some of our older kids that end up in the system for a while, but when you look at each school change puts them 3 to 6 months behind, again, that is just so devastating for our youth that already come with so many challenges. And where the last statistic really impacts me, I'm working with our transition to adult living youth right now, and over only 46% of them end up graduating high school, which is sad. Only 3% go on to graduate with a bachelor's degree. There's many scholarships and opportunities for our foster youth to go on to college. So it's not limited opportunities, it's just these kids have not developed the skills that'll make them successful in going on. And so that's one of the challenges we have to face when we're meeting their needs in, you know, primary and secondary education. So we realize that these kids come with needs. So fortunately, there's some legal protections that have been put in place, and our school partnerships have been developed. Child instability in foster care and their poor educational performance are major problems that we're aware of. The nation, Utah, and Dcfs have become increasingly aware. Many years ago now, education and human services partnered together to develop the Youth in Care program. Started out as Youth in Custody, now it's Youth in Care, and started the mentors because they realized, hey, these kids come with challenges. We need to put somebody in the schools that's going to help them. And so those monies and those mentors are very important to our kids. And so that's been put in place. But most recently, we've really been focused on educational stability and all that brings for our kids. In 2015, you know, Congress passed Every Student Succeeds Act, and it put in some additional protections for kids in foster care. Utah went ahead and enacted that law a couple years ago, and it allows our kids who come into foster care to be able to stay in their home school and maybe prevent disruption if we can do that. It helps us overcome some of those district barriers. So that's been a great protection put in place. What I want the mentors to understand is that we really do prioritize that stability. I think we have challenges, and we're going to talk about what those challenges are. But I think it was last year this best interest determination came out. I know the State Board of Education has it on their website, and the schools understand this. But please, I want you to understand, we as an agency, we do prioritize this stability for our kids. We know that it's going to improve their outcome if they can stay at the same school. So this is something that we train our workers on and we share with them. A couple things that I just wanted to bring out in this. Again, when we're deciding whether we move a child, it really should be for safety. It should be if their educational needs can't be met. Some additional things that we look at is, you know, how long have they been in that school? Man, if this kid has spent several years in this elementary school, we really need to look closely at whether we move the child just because he moved to a foster home in another district. Looking at the number of schools that they've attended, this especially becomes something difficult when our kids hit high school age, you know, and they've had 15 schools and we're trying to track down all those records. I mean, that impacts them negatively. We want to look at their meaningful relationships at school. They have relationships with the school counselors, the school receptionists, their teachers, peers. These are important relationships that we can't replace. So we need to be looking at that. Also, where do their siblings attend? You know, of course, one of the things we have to consider is length of the commute, because we have foster homes in all areas of the Salt Lake Valley. And I know some of you are mentors in other areas of the state. And so you have distance barriers that are huge. I know that. And so we do have to look at that. But really, you can see it's kind of down the list. And unfortunately, that ends up being one of the biggest barriers we face. So that's what I wanted to talk a little bit about. So what are the barriers or challenges that we face when caseworkers and teams are making decisions about moving kids to new schools? One of the biggest ones is just high caseworker turnover. I'm sure you as mentors, especially I know many of you from the Salt Lake area and you've been around for years, our caseworker force is new, is young. They don't always know how to implement some of these things. They may not realize how to empower kids and how to be their advocate as much as somebody who's been in the system for a while. We in Salt Lake have really faced this over the last 2 years. I'm sure all of the areas have, where we just don't have the workforce that understands some of these important issues. Some of the other challenges we face, limited placement resources, or a child needs a higher level of care, a child ends up having to go to residential care. And so of course that's going to impact them being able to stay in their home school. And then one of our biggest barriers is transportation. And I know that all of you are aware of that. But what I see that is really bothering to me is usually that's the first issue that is brought up. Foster parents generally, and this is not to speak ill of them, but generally, you know, they've got other kids in their home or they have to prioritize things and they look at school as maybe not as important, particularly for maybe an elementary school child, where we that work with them in the schools understand, no, actually disrupting them is going to cause some challenges for them. If it's in another district or it's more than just a couple miles and the school cannot provide that transportation, then we face barriers with foster parents or proctor parents willing to do that. One of the things that I wanted to make sure you were aware of is that, you know, firstly, I encourage you, please work with the caseworker. If you have a caseworker that's saying, hey, we're going to move this kid because they're moving to a new home, remind them of best interest determination. Remind them that there are options to keep that kid in that school. They may just not know that, and your input is important to them. Also, Dcfs licensed foster parents do get mileage reimbursement for transporting a youth to their school of origin or a school that they just came from if they just moved. So it's not a lot of money, but that is sometimes an incentive for our foster homes to be able to keep the kid in that school. But unfortunately for our older youth who often get placed in proctor homes, that is still a barrier. Contract issues, you can only reimburse a proctor parent if it's a round trip of like 63 miles. And so often, maybe in more rural areas, but in Salt Lake and metro areas, that's not usually the case to go to another school. And so it does cause issues with that. But I at least want the caseworkers and the teams to have a discussion, at least see if there's any way to make it possible before we automatically assume that, no, we need to disrupt the child. The other thing is just youth self-determination. That was my positive way of saying, you know, youth, our kids sometimes just don't want to be at that school. They just don't want to be in the classroom, and they have behavioral challenges. And sometimes that mandates that they have to go to a different school setting or to go somewhere else. So that is also a barrier for some of these older kids and why they disrupt so often. Okay, but let's talk about the youth and care mentors. Your voice really is important. I was a caseworker for over 10 years, and my relationships with my youth and care mentors, I still have relationships with them today. Like, I mean, they're around, I'm around. Like, I utilize them a lot. And so while our younger workforce may not understand that yet, we want you to know that the division respects your role and your input. We want you to contact caseworkers whenever you feel like you need to. Please don't hesitate. Don't think that you're causing them work or that it's not something that you should do. If our kid in your school has a need and you need to let us know so that we can help meet that need. Don't ever hesitate. And I want you to understand our philosophy at Dcfs. We work in a team model. Many of you are probably aware we have child and family team meetings, and we look at important people in our kids' lives as members of that team. Sometimes schools get overlooked, particularly with like our little primary age kids in primary school, but we need input from teachers, from counselors, from mentors. You guys are important members of our team in giving us information. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go along, but in addition to saying, you know, if you reach out to a caseworker, again, we have one of the biggest challenges that I hear from our partners, our community partners, is I couldn't get a hold of this caseworker. They didn't give me a call back. They didn't respond. I understand that they have a lot on their plate, but it's never an excuse for not getting back to a school or a mentor and finding out what it is you need. Don't ever hesitate to go up the chain and say, okay, I couldn't get hold of a caseworker for some reason. Maybe they've quit, maybe they're on vacation, but reach out and get a supervisor. That's the next step. You are also more than willing to reach out to an administrator, or I'm going to share a little bit later. There is an education liaison in each of our Dcfs regions. I am the one in Salt Lake. I have mentors reach out to me all the time just to ask, hey, I can't get hold of this caseworker. Can you help me? That is part of our role in liaisoning with schools, is making sure that we're listening to your voice and that we're getting what we need for that child. So please continue to do that. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we talked about is how we can work as a team. Let's talk about maybe barriers or why your input is so important and valuable. First, of course, you are working directly with kids and you're in the school, you're seeing them in the classroom, you are seeing them interact with peers, you are getting firsthand reports. That is something that caseworkers often don't get. We need to know, and foster parents need to know, what is going on in the school setting. Teachers are often busy, they have large classrooms, they have 30 kids, whereas maybe you only have a few kids in that school. So often we can get valuable information from you, whereas maybe teachers, we wouldn't be as responsive. So please, we need to hear what you have to say. Yeah, the second thing is, please don't hesitate to introduce yourself to caseworkers and explain your role. There's so many new caseworkers out there. They don't understand what a youth and care mentor is, or what you do, or how valuable you can be to them. So I encourage you, beginning of a school year coming up, introduce yourself to your caseworkers. Make sure they know that they can reach out to you. One of the questions that Ann Jones had said, well, talk about how often you want updates. I'm telling you, we want them. The caseworkers may not know they want them, but we want regular updates. And when I say regular, I don't know the amount of reports and data collecting that you have to do as mentors, but monthly is great, or quarterly would be like a minimal, I would say, is that every few months we need to know how that child is doing. And if somebody from Dcfs hasn't reached out to you and said, hey, how is Johnny doing in class? We welcome you to reach out and provide that update for us. As far as reaching out to foster parents, I think foster parents may or may not, newer ones may not understand your role either. That is great with us. We would just ask that if you're sharing information with the foster parent, it should also be shared directly with the caseworker. We don't want to get in a situation where two of the team members understand something going on with Johnny, but yet the caseworker maybe doesn't know. But workers, we're accountable to families, courts, and our administration to know what's going on with kids in school. So you're not bothering us by providing that information. Coming to child and family team meetings and IEP meetings. One of the barriers that we face is that a lot of our kids are in special ed, as I said. Our younger workforce maybe doesn't understand a lot of special ed rules and guidelines. And so your help, whereas you guys have a lot of experience, coming to an IEP meeting or helping us with the special ed process would be greatly appreciated. So where we can't always get a teacher to come to team meetings, we would love to have a mentor come to a team meeting. And now that we're doing them more virtually, we've had an increase in our participation. I wouldn't be surprised if even after some of the restrictions lift, that we still do virtual meetings, because we want to get input from as many team members as we can. So if you're a mentor in a school and Donnie's been there three or 4 months and you haven't heard from a caseworker, it's great for you to reach out and say, hey, I'm able to come to team meetings. When's your next meeting? They will likely appreciate it. They just didn't know to invite you. So don't hesitate. The other thing that's really valuable about youth and care mentors is just engaging and interfacing with school staff. Sometimes a caseworker's like, I don't know who Johnny's teacher is. I don't know who to contact at the school to find out what happened yesterday. You guys know that information. So if we reach out to you, you're a great resource for us that way as well. But like I said, especially with special ed and some of those roles. Help with education court report completion. Hopefully, let me quickly go to that so you can see it. Sorry, it's a little small, but I could only take a screenshot. But hopefully you as mentors in all areas have seen this. This is a statewide directive. It's not just Salt Lake Valley Dcfs. The juvenile court judges approved a education court report. It's been several years ago now. This is the updated one that we just completed last year. But what the judges were seeing was, of course, our kids are struggling in school. Their kids aren't graduating. Our kids are failing. They're sloughing school, and they didn't feel like they were as involved or getting as much information as they wanted. So they came out with this court report several years ago now and asked juvenile justice, probation, and Dcfs to be utilizing this at pretty much every hearing to update the court on, hey, how's this kid doing in classes? What are their grades? Are they truant? Kind of behavioral challenges, but also some of the positives. We encourage our kids, are they getting awards for their behavior? Are they in after school programs or clubs? Those are things that are important to highlight with the courts and when we review these cases. So we simplified this last year. We got together as a group and we simplified this and really tried to just stick to the basics. And so one of the things that we set up, and hopefully you're all aware of this, is that our youth and care mentors would be great contacts in each of the districts to help us fill this out. And so hopefully, I'm going to go out and promote this in Salt Lake region again, but hopefully this is starting next year. We're going to start seeing this more. You're going to get caseworkers reach out to you, and they're going to ask you to help them get the information for this. So just wanted to share that. And then something that's often overlooked is help. You guys could help us plan transition for child returning home. Maybe the kid's staying at this same school, but maybe not. But you know what's worked with this child. You would be a great voice at the team meeting to say, okay, Johnny's going home with his mom. And so this is what worked with him in the classroom. This didn't work. This is what you're going to want to be aware of. That would just be such a great resource to have you directly communicating with maybe the parent or the team that's going to be working with him in a trial home placement. The other thing is, I know some of the districts allow the mentors to stay on with that child through the end of the school year. So maybe Johnny goes home, but maybe doesn't change schools. The mentor, I know in Salt Lake especially, and if that's wrong in other areas, I apologize, but they've been able to stay on and kind of see Johnny through the end of that school year, and that's a great resource. So we really need to work together as a team. Okay, is there any questions so far, Amanda? Maybe it's a good time to ask.
No questions, but we did have a mentor comment that they have used the court report form before.
Perfect. So again, new workforce here at Dcfs, they may not know. We kind of, that's a challenge I have to overcome, is to, helping workers know they need to do it. So if you haven't seen one from a worker, please don't hesitate to say, hey, Johnny said there's court coming up. Would you like me to help you get that education report filled out? Great resource that you guys would be. So, all right, well, I just wanted to share, if you don't know, there is a Educating Youth in State Care website. This is a website that helps both of us. So it helps Dcfs workers find out the local youth and care contact, but it also can help you guys find the liaison in your area or a caseworker. So I just wanted to quickly, if you're not familiar with how Dcfs operates in Utah, there are 5 regions that serve Utah. And when you go to that website, it kind of shows this map. So you can see Salt Lake Valley, where Twila and Salt Lake. Western is all of these counties. Southwest, Eastern, Northern. So if you're a mentor in one of those areas, you also can utilize this map. Or what often happens is kids are placed up in Salt Lake from some of these more rural areas, and maybe the caseworkers haven't worked as closely with Salt Lake, and so they can go in and they can find out, okay, who's the youth and care mentor in this area. So it's very helpful. So let me show you really quick. So you can go in and you can highlight the school district. There's the website. You can highlight the school district, and you can find this. So if I pull up Salt Lake, I can see, okay, the liaison is me. I can see that it doesn't list, and it doesn't list maybe the mentors, but it lists the main youth and care director, and so they can go there and they can find it. But mentors, you can use this website, and like I said, you can find out who's the Dcfs person there, that you could find out who's the caseworker, or report an issue with the school district. It also has your JJS liaison, so that might be helpful for some of you to know. I wanted to share this, and I did share this PowerPoint. You're welcome to utilize this. It does change, but this has been pretty consistent for the last year or two. So I am the liaison for Salt Lake, but you have Eric Jenkins, who's in Western. He's been there for a long time. Candace Jensen in Eastern, and then Paige Pryor in Southwest. It's our northern area up in Ogden, Brigham City. That position has changed, and so I'm not quite sure who is over that. But I want you to know you can reach out to any one of us in your area there to find out a caseworker, or to find out somebody in another area, for sure. We work closely enough, or we at least know who to reach out to within our division. So keep that as a resource. Sometimes also I've been called, like to say there's a problem, like a systemic issue, maybe with a district and Dcfs, or a particular school. Like, these liaisons are also good contacts for some of those kind of issues. What do you do if you suspect abuse or neglect in a foster home? That might be a concerning area, and maybe you've not been presented with that, or you're not sure how to handle it. First of all, we always encourage the school personnel or the mentor to call and report the abuse directly. And the reason for that is it's firsthand reporting. Maybe you saw something on the child, maybe the child said something directly to you. And so it always is more impactful coming from you if you called and reported it. Most of our reports come from the school setting, because you guys are the eyes and ears of these kids. I know in summer we kind of have a lull, but we're expecting this to pick back up in August when kids return to school on some level and start seeing their teachers and their mentors again. I would say also let the caseworker know of your concerns. But once you see it, or the kid tells you something, try to cease talking with the child about the issue, because we don't want to impact an investigation that might happen, and we don't want to get too much information given to you that you don't need to be responsible for. So report your concerns, and then just let Dcfs handle it from there. And please know that reporting is kept confidential. So even though people can suspect who reported it, it's never confirmed. And the CPS worker might call you and ask you a little bit more information, but they never share your information with the foster parent or anything like that. So you would be kept confidential. So that's kind of what I was asked to share, but if there's any additional questions, I'm happy to answer anything more specific.
Amanda again. So folks, you're welcome to unmute yourselves or put your questions in the chat. And you can even use the emojis to let me know if you need me to unmute you. I'm happy to help with that control if needed. And there were a few other comments about other mentors using the court report forms. So
outside of Salt Lake, are some of you from other areas that are also utilizing it?
Let's see, these were mostly comments. So up in Ogden.
Okay, good.
And then Jordan School District. So that's
great.
technically Salt Lake.
Sure. But no, I mean, it's a statewide, so many things have happened with DCFS that I don't know that it was rolled out or really promoted maybe as much as it could have been with all these other things that have been happening. But it is a statewide form that we use. So,
Is there a general link we could share with them that maybe you could send me so I could forward it out later, just in case?
for the court report,
Yes.
so what I can do is it's in our DCFS safe forms, but I'm happy to share a PDF with you that you could see it. And I mean, obviously we could still use it that way. So
Yeah.
I'm happy to do that. Amanda will do that later today.
Can you hear me?
Like we do have a comment.
Yes.
Oh yeah, mine, it was not a question. I was telling you that we had been working with the education core report for years already. We use those and we provide those to our caseworker. We are on the Jordan School District.
Great.
That we are very familiar with this document.
Very good. I'm glad to hear that. When
Yeah.
we took some data last year when we were meeting as a group, so there was judges, there was school districts, there was DCFS, JJS. We all met to kind of look at the court report, and we did a bunch of data collecting. I'm glad to hear the mentors were familiar with it, but what was sad was 3rd District, which is my district, here in Salt Lake, we were the lowest in actually utilizing the court report and submitting it. So that was kind of one of the reasons why we wanted to relook at it and re-promote it, is because it was not being utilized across the board as it should. But I'm glad to hear that many of you are seeing it.
Oh no, we do it. We use it and we send it every single time that the caseworker.
Nice.
They have court. Even when my student, if the caseworker doesn't let me know that there's a court time, the student, they always ask. I always ask my students, and if they tell me, I send immediately the education court report, and either way. Every time that we have team meetings, we send reports to the caseworkers, and when they go to court, we provide those educational reports too. So
I'm glad to hear that.
And then I'm talking for all the mentors here, because I know they do it too, and we are 4 mentors here at the Jordan School District.
I just want to say, keep doing that. Like I said, if workers don't know to ask you, just keep doing what you're doing. It is a resource.
Yes.
We're appreciative.
Yes, thank you.
I don't know. I have a question.
Sure.
I need to know, what's the best way to get a hold of mentors, to caseworkers, and let them know information? Is it better to call or email?
I would say, thinking as a busy caseworker and technology is great, maybe an email, only because then it's also in writing and I can just copy that over to my logs. If you're wondering about, hey, I don't have the caseworker's email, that's when you could reach out to the liaison and try to get that. But you're also welcome to call. But I think for them, they probably would appreciate it in an email more.
Okay, and then you say when we're communicating with the parents and the caseworkers, wouldn't, if it's like with schoolwork or procedures, do we need to contact the caseworker and let her know that same thing? Like, homework days this day, and, is that something? That's where I don't know. What do we tell the parents? What do we talk to the caseworkers? You said both, and it'd be a little more difficult. Usually
Sure.
The caseworker doesn't handle the day-to-day. So
no, so that's a good maybe clarification. No, if you're just handling day-to-day introduction to the school year, the classroom, that is fine. It would just be if there was a behavioral issue, if there was a positive thing, like, oh my gosh, Johnny got 100%, and maybe you're sharing that with the foster mom. That would be great to know with the caseworker. So no, just things pertinent to Johnny's performance and how he's doing at school, I think is more clarifying.
So if Johnny gets in trouble at school, is the caseworker supposed to be called every time along with the foster parent, or just the foster parent and they handle it?
So I guess that's where it probably, because what happens a lot of times is that maybe it's called to the foster parent and maybe the caseworker is not notified. So I would say, firstly, if you need them, the foster parent to respond, that's probably usually your first point of contact. But if you don't, maybe you just call the caseworker and let them know. Or maybe if you're calling the foster mom, say, will you make sure that the caseworker knows about this? If that's clarified, that would be okay. If not, I would say we need to contact both of them.
So
Because sometimes we're not getting that information.
should we be training the administrators to contact them both is what I'm going to ask. Should administrators
I
at
think
the
yes.
school?
I mean, both of us are listed on that youth and care
Okay.
form. If there's a behavioral issue where it's big enough that the school needs to contact someone, they absolutely either, I'm going to say they could either just first and foremost contact the caseworker. We would then follow up with the foster home, or they need to do it with both.
Okay, that's what I need to know. Thank
Okay.
you very much.
You are
You're-
welcome.
Very good information today. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad. So yeah, if there's none other questions, Amanda, I'll let you get to the rest of your meeting. But thank you for letting me come present.
Well, thank you for making time for us today. I really appreciate it. This was helpful for me too. I think I'm one that kind of hesitates, worries about creating the extra barrier or the extra work. But I really like your advice of sending an email so that the information is out there. If you don't have time to make that phone call, maybe you just send the email to both the foster parent and the caseworker.
Absolutely.
And then just the one phone call to the foster parent to follow up if necessary to kind of help simplify it for the mentors as well. We do have one question in the chat. It says, how do we get information updated for our county?
Okay, so Jeff, maybe be more specific. Are you talking about, I don't know what county you're in. Are you talking about the caseworker, or are you talking about liaison? Oh, okay, so you are in the infamous northern area. So Jeff, if that's something you would like, I am happy to try to figure that out. Who is, if it's just a caseworker or a supervisor, you are more than welcome to email me. If it's a bigger issue and you guys would like to know who the education liaison is with Dcfs, I can find that out. Yeah, so you can go in there on, so Jeff is asking, can you go to that page that I shared? Yes, the only problem is the only district liaison with Dcfs that wasn't in there was yours, Jeff. So I'm sorry. For some reason, Northern has had some turnover and I don't know who it is. So if it's that person, that might not be in there, but if it's a caseworker or supervisor, you can reach out to me anytime and I'm happy to try to figure out who it is, because I can look it up and save very easily and just let you know who to contact. Okay, great. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your conference.
Thank you so much. I really